So I'm particularly grateful that DRAGOS, TUDORACHE could actually make time in his schedule. This was a possible, maybe, you know, but it's great that you could be here. And we've had conversation over the months, really, on what I consider very much an industrial strategy, an industrial policy kind of angle that we need to push. We had a discussion in the morning, you weren't here, but very much the spirit was, when it comes to digital, we are looking at an all-purpose technology like AI that goes into every key sectors, from defense to manufacturing. That's why we will talk about these things after. It's not something which is siloed into a digital world. And so it's been good to just have these exchanges with you on the industrial strategy dimension of all of this, which of course you're very active on. But I want to start with perhaps a slight elliptical entry into the question, which is, you were in Davos last week. There was a lot happening. I'll be brief. What were your takeaways and impression? You were there with the EVP and had various conversations, and of course, it has been pretty much an epiphany for many. But will you talk to us about takeaways and things?
Well, thank you, Christina, first for having me. Indeed, it's not easy to find time in these crazy days, in this crazy world. But happy to be here. I couldn't resist the title of the conference, so congratulations for that. So Davos and takeaways. I think it's always good to reflect back, you know. So I looked at Davos this year and I looked at Davos last year. I was also last year with the EVP. And for context, if you remember, Davos last year was coming 2 or 3 months after the Draghi report. And Draghi report, what it did, it put a very accurate laser-sharp mirror in front of us to the point where it showed every pimple, every bump, every imperfection in our economic and industrial output. And also to the outside world, it opened the window to us looking in that mirror. So Davos last year was very much doom and gloom. At least the impression that we had with the EVP, I remember driving back from Davos after 2 days and after talking to CEOs, European CEOs, US CEOs from other parts of the world, and literally, I don't think we had a single meeting, a single discussion where there was optimism. So a lot of self-flagellation that we Europeans sometimes are very good at, but objectively, I mean, very clear criticism as to where we were, what we were doing, very much also referring to what Draghi was saying in his report. And if I compare it to how it evolved in terms of mood, atmosphere, impressions this year, there's a market change. And it's also interesting that I think a lot of people went to Davos expecting, in fact, not necessarily a good outcome, because everyone was expecting the intervention that President Trump would make, and somehow everyone was anticipating another session of bashing Europe. But the impression that we got from talking to literally almost all, I could maybe think of 1 or 2 discussions where the same lingering criticism was there. But overall, there was much more, maybe I won't call it necessarily optimism, because maybe that's too far, but the realization that with all its faults, because there are still a lot of things that we haven't done right, there are still a lot of things that we're still trying to achieve, and even the things that we did last year still have to actually unravel before they actually have the effects that we want in our economy. But there was a sense that there is a point of gravity, that there is stability, there is a direction of travel that the European Union now has, and that there is optimism in terms of investing in Europe, in terms of building a future in Europe. And this came not only from European companies, big or small, but also, I would say interestingly, from American companies who either have been investing for quite some time in Europe and who said that they are committed to remain and continue to invest, but also one who are looking now for new prospects in Europe. So I think overall this was a good moment for Europe. I think it was also a moment where Europe showed that it stands on its feet, that it's actually able to hold back and also to anticipate and put forward a firm position on geopolitics, but certainly with effects on economics. So again, overall, I came back with a much more positive vibe than last year.
I'm pleased you say that, because this morning you went here, I started the day by saying, you know, I have 3 messages for the day. 1 is we are a superpower, don't let anyone tell us we're not. 2, it's on us. And 3 is we're building, we must build, we must move. So I was also in Davos and I had a similar impression that there was, and there is beyond Davos, that's why we're having a panel later on today talking about going long on Europe. So private capital and builders are betting much more on Europe. And that is really where, you know, the balance, I think, of effort is needing to come from. Because what I see, and we had an interesting panel this morning with governments, with the Commission, with the Parliament, a world in which everyone is motivated and wants to do things, but there's still far too much lag in terms of action. So from where you sit, clearly you're very alive to the need for very close cooperation with industry. Industry needs to leave, and indeed the EVP produced, can I mention, a text which was about European preferences, which has been, I think, signed by many European firms. Can you tell us how you see the way in which industry is behind you, and at the same time you're behind industry in this? We need to power up, we need to sell, we need to buy, we need to do our stuff, because otherwise it's not going to happen.
Well, it's good to say that, because in fact everything that we have been trying to do since the start of this mandate is to change a bit the paradigm in which we actually understand our interaction with industry. From a position where we thought that we would be knowing better what you regulate, knowing better what kind of nudging you give to the industry, to your economy to move forward, to a position where I think much more humbly, I would say, we recognize that in fact we don't hold all the answers, or if we are to hold the answers and to do the right things, the right moves, we have to do it by listening and bringing in the industry. And apart from, let's say, the more general policy papers that were produced at the start of last year with the Compass and everything that followed since then, we've taken a much more, we believe, a much more practical, pragmatic approach by taking sector by sector, starting with the ones that were hurting the most: automotive, energy intensive, steel. There were already the cries for help and the cries for do something or we go under had been on for quite some time. And we're going to keep the same approach. Again, we've started with those industries that were hurting most, automotive, steel, chemicals, etc. But it's going to continue, and this year digital is going to be addressed quite a lot, because as you said at the beginning, this is a vertical or horizontal at the same time throughout our industrial sectors, our economy. But always with this spirit, which I'm hoping that industry is feeling. I'm hoping that they are sensing that we are much more open now to understand and to get solutions from them. And this is something that my EVP tells them all the time. Listen, don't believe for a second that we hold the ideas or the solutions. No, because our policy officers, as good as they are, they know policy. The reality needs to come from the industry. They need to be the ones who tell us actually what are the best solutions if we want to get the effect that we want to get. So we can outline the narrative, we can outline the direction or the objectives, but the means, the how, needs to come and needs to be built on the input that they give us. So it's a joint effort, which I hope is going to continue.
Yeah, and I couldn't emphasize this more, because there's no secret that when setting up Eurostack, for example, we called it an industrial initiative. And the idea is very much that there needs to be partnership and working together. The question is, in practice, how can that be accelerated in the most effective way? Because when you talk to, of course, even our regulators, they say, well, okay, now we are deregulating, and that kind of bit is going to become simpler. We need to unleash industry. We need to unleash. And then the question is, what does unleash mean? What does concretely unleashing mean? Because and we'll have this discussion later, I don't want to dwell on it, but we introduced a lot of regulation with good intention, but the thought was, well, we hold back the big guys and then industry will be unleashed to do to create, to grow, to create itself. It didn't happen because industry doesn't unleash unless there is demand, unless there is demand for the product. What do you see as the kind of catalyst for unleashing in some dimension?
Well, I think there's also a discussion to be had as to inevitably, to the geopolitical context in which we find ourselves, and also to the external factors that have radically changed the way, in fact, global trade, global economy functions. Because a couple of years ago, some of the things and some of the catalysts that we're now trying to put in place would have been blasphemy. Why? Because we were in a totally open economy, in an open trade. We believed in that. We've built our growth for decades and decades on those tenets. So it's very difficult to change those reflexes. And I think that's something, speaking of sovereignty, it's something that we also see today, that some of these reflexes are actually changing all of a sudden mindset from an open economy, open value chains, where you just rely that companies know what to do themselves, right? And you as a policymaker in a liberal economy, you just sit back, make sure that you don't get in the way too much. Well, there's a discussion to be had as us getting in the way, maybe too much in the way of regulation and so on and so forth, but I'll put that on the side for now. But now, in the current context, we have to step in much more than we did before. It's not a simple choice, because again, it's not a simple choice to change your radical DNA, which is what we're doing, but you have to. And how you do that is, again, by putting more of the enablers, more of the facilitation, more of the simplification out there for the same economic actors that are still acting in a free economy to be able to then do that springing, do that growth that they need to do. At the same time, we need to protect them much more than we did before from those external factors. Again, something that was not part of the agenda until recently, but the component of protecting, not only facilitating, not only accelerating, not only giving quicker permits, not only giving them quicker access, not only creating new conditions for capital to move around, but also to protect them actively through active measures from behaviors that are affecting their bottom line. Whether they are rewriting of trade rules, whether they are export restrictions imposed by other jurisdictions. So all of these external drivers, which are fundamentally eroding our industrial base and the capacity for our actors to actually play out in this new economic reality, that demands that, again, we take different kind of measures than we would have taken years ago. Yeah. And this is what we're seeing now. This is what everything that we have been doing since last year. This is what we will continue to do, the Industrial Accelerator Act. All of the measures that you're going to see coming out of the Commission are basically meant to support this fundamental theory.
So you named the name Industrial Accelerator Act. I was going to go there inevitably. I know you can't talk in detail about it, but that is really looking at heavy industry, at part of European industry. You know, the speculation and discussion about what's holding that up, the European preference is known to be controversial. I know you can't be in any way definitive and dispositive about where this is going, but give us a sense for where you think the sort of the discussion on that is, and not necessarily where we end up, but I mean, everyone's waiting.
Maybe a few words on the waiting and the time frame, because I know there has been a lot of speculation as to why we don't have an IAA yet. And you know that the first time was supposed to come out in December, then it was supposed to come out actually today, and now it's going to come out later in February. And the reason for that, in a way, is very much linked to what I was saying earlier, to some of the, I would say natural, not to be condemned, reflexes that we still have, most of us, from this changing world and this changing paradigm. which, as I said, I'm not going to repeat, is requiring new measures, but new measures which are coming somewhat against our DNA. Again, protecting yourself, maybe closing parts of your market, certain sectors, to FDI in the way we were open until now. These things, I think, do have a natural resistance because you want to rewrite the rules, but you don't want to fundamentally change what is and needs to remain an open economy and open trade as much as possible. So there is an underlying tension there, which, as I said, is natural, which requires solutions which are very well crafted to make sure that you actually get the right effect without unintended consequences. Unintended consequences internally for your own industries and sectors,
like
but also
what?
unintended consequences for partners that you want to work with. Because again, in this crazy world, as crazy as it may be, but there are still islands of normality. There are jurisdictions that still look at the world in the same way as we do, that look at the world rules and the trade rules and the economic interactions in the same way that we do. So when you want to put a made in Europe, the famous phrase in town these days, provision in your legislation, you want to make sure that while you do that, you don't hinder companies and jurisdictions that actually are aligned with your thinking. You want to do it in a way that actually only targets those predatory practices that are coming from those jurisdictions or from those companies that do not play by the same rules. So that's where the difficulty is, as honest as I can be at this stage. It is actually very much a battle of lawyers at this moment, trying to figure out how do you craft. So in a way, I think the broad objectives of the IAA are shared by all. Because everyone understands that there needs to be acceleration behind some of the key industrial sectors, because one thing, open a bracket, IAA is not going to cover everything. We're going to be targeting only specific sectors that we believe need this sort of extra protection and extra nudging to actually survive and thrive in this new context. So one point to make is that we're going to be targeted. But again, at the same time, to figure out the best way in which you can give that protection, you can give that facilitation without having those unintended consequences, like, for example, I don't know, you're restricting competition. Because if you zero down or you create certain conditions for accessing the market, you might also be hindering free competition or, again, free trade. So these things need to be very well ironed out. I think suffice to say that the objectives are clear to all. We're just now working the modalities.
So let me, it wouldn't be me if I don't try and just push back a little bit. I hear entirely where you're coming from, and I'm saying this in an entirely positive light. But surely there is priorities, right? And the priority for Europe needs to be growth. We need to grow, otherwise we are toast. We know. No one respects us for our values. They respect us if we have industrial muscle and if we have power. So growth is essential. I understand that one at the lawyerly level can be worried about discrimination and WTO and so on. I don't want to name or point at the person in the room who was telling me from the United States, but you know, you guys in Europe, you worry about WTO. Why? Why? You just have emergency over there. You really need to move fast, and you can claim that this is emergency. Do what you gotta do. Do what you gotta do and worry about it later. And even the partners you mentioned, which I can imagine are Korea, Japan, like-minded people, you know, sorry, but, you know, we need to help European industry. They would do that. They wouldn't just say, oh, Lord, we need to be fair to the Europeans, you know. This is one of our biases, that we're fair to the world, when the world isn't remotely fair to us. So exactly why are we trying to preserve this? It is sorry, devil's advocate.
No, I don't think you're devil's advocate. I think you're pointing exactly to some of the questions that we have ourselves. But I think, so first observation to make, and I don't want to compare us with any other jurisdictions out there, but again, when we look at the world and draw certain consequences, others look at the same world and they draw similar consequences. So you mentioned like-minded. Yes, those like-minded, just like us, are looking at this world and are saying, Can I still do what I used to do 2-3 years ago? And the answer is no. That's why in Japan, in Canada, in South Korea, in Australia, you have exactly the same kind of discussions that you have right now. You have a buy Canadian discussion in Canada. You have a buy Japanese stimulation exercise through loans and other things in Japan, and so on and so forth. But I think that while you do that, I think there is a certain duty, call it moral, historical, political duty, that I think those that believe still in certain values and certain rules have towards themselves, towards partners that are like them, and towards the rest of the world as a model, to still do everything you can to preserve as much as possible of a global system of norms. Because if you yourself, while claiming that moral ground, go down the path of saying, well, in fact, you know what? F the WTO rules. And well, my partners, they're also thinking of doing buy Canadian or buy Japanese. If we go down that path ourselves, then everything that we see around us as an order collapses completely. So we also have that duty to preserve as much as possible a certain sense of order and a system. And I think you can do that and strike that balance. And that's, again, it's taking a little bit longer, but I think you can strike that balance between promoting and protecting what you think you need to do for your economy to survive in this much crueler world, while at the same time not throwing the baby with the bathwater because no one
Look, I couldn't agree more with you. And as a European, I just subscribe to the kind of moral and things that you say. You know, my heart pumps when I hear this. At the same time, and I don't have an answer, but we're faced with an administration, and I don't want to pass judgment, where effectively precedent in the past is seen as an opportunity to do something completely different. And there's some attraction in saying, who cares about these stupid precedents? We will do what suits us. And, you know, we do take a different path, but, you know, I'm worried that, you know, we are doing what we're doing. I'm not telling you anything you don't know, but we are delaying our own ability to fight back. That said, I'll give you the last word.
No, it's not about last word, but I wanted to give an example that just happened 2 weeks ago. I don't know if you paid attention to the Cybersecurity Act, which I think is a good place to look at to understand a bit the direction of travel, which is exactly trying to do that thing, which is to recognize that you have certain security concerns that you have to address. You have certain sovereignty concerns that you need to address. You have vulnerabilities in your value chain that you need to address. But at the same time, you can't, again, knock everyone off their feet. And I think that with the CSA, we managed to find that middle ground in which we have the tools now to protect ourselves from those that would be still choosing practices that are against our interests. So we're going to be naming third countries that we would consider to be threats to our cybersecurity. We're going to be naming companies and entities that are going to be considered as high risk, and therefore they'll have limited access to what? To our research, to our funding, to our markets and public procurement. So these are the kind of tools that you can put on the table, speaking of stimulants and what the industry needs, so that you create the conditions in which European companies here can actually have a fair level playing field to actually do the growth that they need to do with their own devices.
Wonderful. Great note to end on. Please join me in thanking DRAGOS. We have, of course, a very packed afternoon. Thank you for coming. You are wonderful for saying it like it is. I would like to invite the rest of the panel to come up, and while I get myself out of the way, because this is one I don't actually chair,